The dog looked into the storm drain every day, and when it was opened, people were shocked. This dog looked into a storm drain every day, and when it was finally opened, people were shocked to see what was inside. In lots of countries, stray dogs are a common occurrence, but it was one dog in particular that fascinated people by his actions and torture. Formerly called Turkey, a shaggy and dirty stray pup was walking down the street. It was a common occurrence for him to do this on a daily basis, as he scavenged for any food or water that he could find. Hey there, Viral Videos here. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell. We post the most beautiful, amazing, and scary videos every single day. Let's proceed with the video. The day had started out like normal, with a dog happily trotting down the road, wagging his tail at anyone who looked his way. Despite living on the streets, the dog was actually very friendly and loved to get pets off of people passing by. As the animal made his way down one particular street, he suddenly smelled something delicious. He followed his nose until he found himself standing in front of a butcher's shop. Looking through the window, the dog watched as customers bought large chops of meat for their dinner. Just looking at the food made the dog realize how hungry he was and caused his stomach to let out a loud growl. Inside the shop, a young woman called Annie was finishing paying for a couple of large steaks. Once she was done, she thanked the butcher and made her way out of the shop. Once outside, Annie started walking down the street towards her home, when all of a sudden, she heard a loud gurgle and a whimper. The confused young woman turned around, only to see the stray dog looking back at her with very sad eyes. Once again, the canine's stomach growled, and Annie knew then what the problem was. The dog was clearly a stray, and a very hungry one at that. Seeing the hungry animal, Annie immediately felt bad for it. She looked down at the steaks that she had just bought before marching back into the butcher's and asking for any cut-offs or bones that the man wouldn't sell. The butcher happily gave the woman what she wanted. Annie exited the shop and looked around for the stray dog. She soon found him watching her from a distance. The woman crouched down on the floor and carefully held out the bone that she had gotten for him. At first, the dog was cautious and didn't want to get too close to the woman, but the longer that she held the food out to him, the less the animal could resist creeping closer to get the meal. Finally, Annie managed to gain enough of the animal's trust that he started wagging his tail and accepted the large bone off of her. But instead of eating the food right then and there, the dog picked it up and began walking off as if he had somewhere to be. Confused about the canine's reaction, but not wanting to question it too much, Annie simply stood back up and made her way back home. The next day, Annie was walking down the street when she noticed the same stray dog from yesterday. The animal seemed to have noticed her as well, and came happily bounding up to the woman with its tail wagging. Annie smiled at the dog's enthusiasm for her, and began to fuss over him. Unfortunately, the young woman had places to be, so she couldn't spend too much time with the animal. Before she left, though, she made sure to buy the dog some sausages from a nearby shop. But once again, the dog didn't eat them straight away, and instead walked off again. Annie was curious about the animal's behavior. However, she didn't have time to follow him, and had to go about her day instead. On the third day, Annie once again found the stray dog, only this time it looked like he was waiting for her. The woman had started carrying treats in her bag, in the hope that she would be able to give them to the poor stray. The young woman smiled as she approached the dog, and she gave him the treats that she had this time. When the dog turned around and walked away, though, Annie began to follow him. They eventually came to a busy street, and Annie watched as the shaggy dog made his way over to a storm drain. The dog sat down next to the drain and looked down into it. He then dropped one of the treats that Annie had just given him into it before eating his own. The young woman was very confused. Just what was the dog doing? For the next few days, Annie would find the dog sitting and staring into the storm drain. Every time that she brought the animal some treats, he would always drop half of the food into the drain before eating his own share. Eventually, Annie became so curious that she decided to go and take a look for herself as to what was so interesting in the drain, but she never expected what she found. Annie crept over to the storm drain, weary of the dog who was standing guard next to it, but the canine simply watched the young woman curiously. Once Annie was directly above the drain, she looked down into it and gasped at what she saw. Immediately, the young woman reached for her phone and called the fire department. She would definitely be needing their help. Roughly half an hour later, a couple of firemen showed up and asked the woman what was wrong. Annie explained to them what she had seen, and the men quickly got to work. They walked over to the storm drain, but at that moment the stray dog began to growl at them. Not wanting to be bitten, the firemen stopped. They didn't know what to do, but luckily Annie did. She carefully walked up to the dog, reassuring the animal that the men were only there to help. She then held a treat out to the canine, and when he finally approached her to take it, she grabbed a hold of him to keep him away from the drain and the fireman. With the stray out of the way, the firemen got to work, opening the storm drain up. By this point, because the drain was in the middle of a busy street, a crowd had formed around the firemen to see what they were doing. After a few tense minutes, the firemen finally revealed what the stray dog had been so focused on inside the drain. In one of the firemen's arms was a tiny kitten. All of the bystanders were shocked, but that wasn't the end of it. The fireman ducked back into the storm drain 4 more times. Each time he came up, another kitten was in his arms. Annie was astounded at what she was witnessing. She knew that something was down there as she had seen it when she peeked in, but she had no idea that 5 tiny and adorable kittens had been stuck. At that moment, the stray dog managed to wriggle his way out of Annie's arms and bounded over to the fireman, who had the kittens. As soon as the dog saw the small felines, he immediately began to wag his tail and sniff at them. The kittens mewed back at the canine. Annie walked over to the firemen and asked them just how such young kittens ended up in such a predicament. The fireman told her that it was likely they were swept into the drain during a heavy rain, but considering that they had been trapped, they weren't starving. At this piece of information, Annie looked over at the stray dog. She knew that it was thanks to him sharing his food every day that the kittens had survived. Seeing such a kind act of selflessness, Annie knew what she wanted to do next. She told the fireman that she would take the kittens home with her to raise them until they were ready to be rehomed. The fireman agreed and gave the kittens to Annie. The young woman then began to make her way back home before turning around and calling out to the stray dog. "Come on, Benny," she said. "It's time to go home." The canine happily bounded up to her. Annie looked after all of the kittens and found 4 of them loving homes. When they were old enough to move, she kept one for herself, as she had grown to love them dearly. As well as that, Benny finally had a home to call his own, as Annie had fallen in love with a shaggy dog and couldn't bear to leave him on the streets after what he had done for the tiny felines. The family lived happily together, with neither Fudge the cat or Benny the slightest, but worried that they would end up on the streets again, as Annie loved them too much, and they loved her just as much back. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video and subscribe. See you next time.